Pierre Jean Laval, was born on the 28th of June 1883 in Châtelain, near Vichy in the northern part of Auvergne, the son of Gilbert Laval and Claudine Tournaire. Laval was educated at Marie the village school in Châtelain. At age 15, he was sent to the Lycée Saint-Louis in Paris, where he obtained his baccalaureate in July 1901. He then continued his studies in southwestern France, in Bordeaux and Bayonne, where he learned Spanish and met Pierre Laval. Returning to Lyon, he spent the next year reading for a degree in zoology and served as a supervisor in various colleges and lycées of Lyon, Saint-Étienne and Autun to pay for his studies. Laval joined the Socialist Central Revolutionary Committee in 1903, while he was living in Saint-Étienne, 55 kilometers southwest of Lyon. During this period, Laval became familiar with the left-wing doctrines of Georges Sorel and Hubert Lagardelle. In 1903, he was called up for military service and, after serving in the ranks, was discharged for varicose veins. Laval returned to Paris in 1907 at the age of 24. In April 1913, he said that barrack-based armies were incapable of the slightest effort, because they are badly trained and, above all, badly commanded. Laval favored abolition of the army, and replacement by a citizens' militia. Abandoning natural science studies, Laval eventually turned to law, and became in 1909 a lawyer of the poor people, closed to syndicalists of the years before the First World War were characterized by labor unrest, and Laval defended strikers, trade unionists, and left-wing agitators against government attempts to prosecute them. The first case that led him to fame was the acquittal of Gustave Jimenez, a revolutionary trade unionist charged with possession of explosives and anarchist manuals. Laval married Jean Clossat in 1909, the daughter of socialist politician Dr. Joseph Clossat. Their only child, a daughter named Josie, was born in 1911. In 1911, he ran for parliament in the Neuilly-Boulogne electoral district, and caused the victory of conservative candidate Édouard Nortier by continuing to stand in the second round face to radical candidate Alexandre Persine. In April 1914, as fear of war swept the nation, the socialists and radicals geared up their electoral campaign in defense of peace. Their leaders were Jean Jaurès and Joseph Caillaux. The Bloc des Gauches denounced the law passed in July 1913 extending compulsory military service from 2 to 3 years. In the 1914 legislative election, held 3 months before the outbreak of World War I, the trade unions sought Laval as socialist candidate for the Seine, the district comprising Paris and its suburbs. Laval was elected to the Chamber of Deputies in the 2nd electoral district of Saint-Denis. At nearly 31, he was the youngest member of the chamber. The radicals, with the support of socialists, held majority in the French Chamber of Deputies. Together they hoped to avert war. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria on the 28th of June 1914 and of Jaurès on the 31st of July 1914 shattered those hopes. Laval's brother, Jean, died in the first months of the war. Laval was listed in the Carnet B, a compilation of potentially subversive elements who might hinder mobilization. In the name of national unity, Minister of the Interior Jean-Louis Malvy despite pressure from chiefs of staff, refused to have anyone apprehended. Laval remained true to his pacifist convictions during the war. In December 1915, Jean Longuet, grandson of Karl Marx, proposed to socialist parliamentarians that they communicate with socialists of other states, hoping to press governments into a negotiated peace. Laval signed on, but the motion was defeated. With France's resources geared for war, goods were scarce or overpriced. On the 30th of January 1917, in the National Assembly, Laval called upon the Supply Minister Édouard Herriot to deal with the inadequate coal supply in Paris. In 1923, Aubervilliers, in northern Paris, needed a mayor. As a former deputy of the constituency, Laval was an obvious candidate. To be eligible for election, Laval bought farmland, less burglaries. Few were aware of his defection from the socialists. Laval was also asked by the local FIO and Communist Party to head their lists. Laval chose to run under his own list of former socialists he convinced to leave the party and work for him. This was an independent socialist party of sorts that existed only in Aubervilliers. In a four-way race, Laval won in the second round. He served as mayor of Aubervilliers until just before his death. Laval won over those he defeated by cultivating personal contacts. He developed a network among the humble and the well-to-do in Aubervilliers, and with mayors of neighboring towns. He was the only independent politician in the suburb. He avoided entering the ideological war between socialists and communists. From 1927 to 1930, Laval began to accumulate a sizable personal fortune. After the war, his wealth resulted in charges that he had used his political position to line his own pockets. During the Phony War, Laval was cautiously ambivalent towards the conflict. He was on record as saying in March 1940 that, although the war could have been avoided by diplomatic means, it was now up to the government to prosecute it with the utmost vigor. By this time, Laval had veered and now openly sympathized with National Socialism. He was convinced that Germany would win the war, and felt France needed to emulate its totalitarian regime as much as possible. To that end, when he was included in the cabinet as Minister of State, Laval set about with the work for which he is remembered: dismantling the Third Republic and its democracy, and taking up the fascist cause. In October 1940, Laval understood collaboration more or less in the same sense as Pétain. For both, to collaborate meant to give up the least possible to get the most in return. Laval, in his role of go-between, was forced to be in constant touch with the German authorities, to shift ground, to be wily, and to plan ahead. All this, under the circumstances, drew more attention to him than to the Marshal, and made him appear to many Frenchmen as the agent of collaboration. To others, he was the Germans' man. The meetings between Pétain and Adolf Hitler, and between Laval and Hitler, are often used as evidence of Vichy collaboration with the Nazis. In fact, Montoya was a disappointment to both sides. Hitler wanted France to declare war on Britain, and the French wanted improved relations with her conqueror. Neither happened. Virtually the only concession the French obtained was the Berlin Protocol of the 16th of November 1940, which provided release of certain categories of French prisoners of war. In November 1940, Laval took a number of pro-German, decisions of his own, without consulting with colleagues. The most notorious concerned, turning the RTB, Boer copper mines and the Belgian gold reserves over to Nazi control. After the war, Laval's justification, apart from a denial that he acted unilaterally, was that Vichy was powerless to prevent the Germans from gaining something they were clearly so eager to obtain. Laval's actions were a factor in his dismissal, on the 13th of December 1940. Pétain asked all the ministers to sign a collective letter of resignation during a full cabinet meeting. Laval did so thinking it was a device to get rid of Mbellen, the Minister of Labour. He was therefore stunned when the Marshal announced the resignations. Laval and Ripert are accepted. That evening, Laval was arrested and driven by the police to his home in Shetland. The following day, Pétain announced his decision to remove Laval from the government. The reason for Laval's dismissal lies in a fundamental incompatibility with Pétain. Laval's methods of working appeared slovenly to Pétain's precise military mind, and he showed a marked lack of deference, instanced by a habit of blowing cigarette smoke in Pétain's face. By doing so he aroused Pétain's irritation and the anger of the entire cabinet. On the 27th of August 1941, several top Vichyites including Laval attended a review of the Légion des Volontaires Français, a collaborationist militia. Paul Colette, a member of the Croix de Feu, shot Laval during a troop review, slightly wounding him. Laval soon recovered from the injury. In 1943, Laval became the nominal leader of the newly created milice, though its operational leader was Secretary General Joseph Darnand. About 2 months later, he and some others were arrested by the Germans and transported to Belfort. In view of the speed of the Allied advance, on the 7th of September 1944 what was left of the Vichy government was moved from Belfort to the Sigmaringen enclave in Germany. Pétain took residence at the Hohenzollern Castle in Sigmaringen. At first Laval also resided in this castle. In January 1945 Laval was assigned to the Stauffenberg Castle in Wilflingen, 12 kilometers outside the Sigmaringen enclave. By April 1945 U.S. General George Patton's army approached Sigmaringen, so the Vichy ministers were forced to seek their own refuge. Laval received permission to enter Spain and was flown to Barcelona by Luftwaffe plane. However, 90 days later, de Gaulle pressured Spain to expel Laval. The same Luftwaffe plane that flew him to Spain flew him to the American-occupied zone of Austria. The American authorities immediately arrested Laval and his wife and turned them over to the Free French. They were flown to Paris to be imprisoned at Fresnes prison. Madame Laval was later released. Pierre Laval remained in prison to be tried for treason. Prior to his arrest, Laval had planned to move to Sintra, Portugal, where a house had been leased for him. Laval's trial began at 1:30 p.m. on Thursday the 4th of October 1945. He was charged with plotting against the security of the state and intelligence with the enemy. He had 3 defense lawyers. None of his lawyers had met him before. He saw most of Jaffray, who sat with him, talked, listened and took down notes that he wanted to dictate. Baraduc, who quickly became convinced of Laval's innocence, kept contact with the Chembruns and at first shared their conviction that Laval would be acquitted or at most receive a sentence of temporary exile. No, who had been a member of the resistance, believed Laval to be guilty and urged him to plead that he had made grave errors, but had acted under constraint. Laval would not listen to him. He was convinced that he was innocent and could prove it. He acted as if his career, not his life, was at stake. A sentence of death was handed down in Laval's absence. His lawyers were refused a retrial. The execution was fixed for the morning of the 15th of October 1945, at Fresnes prison. Laval attempted to cheat the firing squad by taking poison from a vial stitched inside the lining of his jacket. He did not intend, he explained in his suicide note, that French soldiers should become accomplices in a judicial crime. The poison, however, was so old that it was ineffective, and repeated stomach pumpings revived Laval. Laval requested that his lawyers witness his execution. He was shot, shouting "Vive la France!" Shouts of "Murderers!" and "Long live Laval!" were apparently heard from the prison. Laval's widow declared, "It is not the French way to try a man without letting him speak." His corpse was initially buried in an unmarked grave in the Fayet cemetery, until it was buried in the Chambrun family mausoleum at the Montparnasse cemetery in November 1945. 62 years, at the time of his execution. Thank you for watching.